Have you ever come across those old texts that just feel surprisingly relevant even today?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, the Arthashastra by Kautilya, it's one of those for me.
It's a
It's
class.
not just some ancient dusty scroll. It's more like a really sharp and practical guide to statecraft, economics, even personal development.
Yeah.
So think of this deep dive as like a cheat sheet to understanding this foundational work.
A crash course in Cotilia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're working with excerpts from Arthashastra's 1915 translation. Right?
That's right.
Our mission here is to pull out the really important nuggets, Kautilya's core ideas, without getting too lost in the weeds.
The need to know stuff.
Exactly. Get
Yeah.
ready for some aha moments because this guy was way ahead of his time.
He really was.
So, to kick things off, Kautilya lays out this framework of 4 essential sciences.
Okay.
He calls them Anvikshaki, Trey, Varda, and Dandaniti.
4 pillars of knowledge.
Yeah, let's break those down one by one.
Sure. So, Anvikshaki might be the most surprising of the bunch. It includes things like the Sankhya and yoga schools of thought, but even Lokayata, which is often interpreted as a materialist or even atheistic philosophy.
Yeah, okay.
So right off the bat, he's saying that critical thinking, philosophical inquiry, those are fundamental.
So it's not just about accepting tradition, it's about like actively questioning and figuring things out.
Exactly. You got to use your brain.
Then there's Trey, which comes from the Triple Vedas.
Right.
This focuses on dharma, what's right and wrong, the ethical foundation of society.
The moral compass.
Exactly. Next up, we've got Varta. This is where things get really practical. Varta covers agriculture, cattle breeding, trade.
The economic engine.
Right. Kautilya believed these were the foundation of wealth, which is essential for a strong state.
Makes sense. Can't have a powerful kingdom without a solid economy.
Absolutely. And last but not least, there's Dandaniti, which is the science of governance. This is all about how to wield power effectively, understanding what works, what doesn't. Kautilya calls this potency and impotency.
So it's like the art of applying all that other knowledge, the philosophy, the ethics, the economics, to actually running a state.
So Anvikshaki is like how to think.
Right.
Trey is what's right.
Okay.
Varta is how to create wealth.
Yeah.
And Dandaniti is how to rule effectively using all of that.
It's a pretty comprehensive framework.
It really is. And what's interesting is that Kautilya actually disagreed with the school of Manu on this.
How so?
Well, Manu's teachings excluded Anvikshaki,
They did.
but Kautilya was adamant that all 4 sciences were crucial. He argued that critical thinking was vital for understanding righteousness and wealth. He saw it as a necessary tool, not something to be ignored.
So he wasn't just about blindly following tradition. He really valued that critical thinking element.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just theoretical for him. He even laid out how a prince should be educated, stressing the importance of learning these 4 sciences from qualified teachers and even government officials. He even mentioned that princes should remain celibate until the age of 16.
Wow. Talk about discipline.
Right. A very structured upbringing.
It really shows how much emphasis he put on building a strong foundation of knowledge and self-discipline.
And that actually leads us to another core idea in the Arthashastra, discipline and restraint. Kautilya believed self-control was absolutely essential, not just for learning, but for effective governance.
Okay.
He lists what he calls the 6 enemies that a person, especially a ruler, must conquer.
Interesting. Where are those?
The list is lust, anger, greed, vanity, haughtiness, and overjoy.
Quite the lineup of vices.
Yeah, it's a pretty clear-eyed look at the human weaknesses that can derail a leader.
He's basically saying these are the things you need to watch out for if you want to stay on track.
Exactly. And he goes even further by specifically defining restraint. He describes it as the absence of discrepancy in sensory perception.
Now, that's interesting. What does he mean by that?
So basically, if you have true self-control, your senses, everything you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, all, give you a consistent and accurate picture of reality.
Okay.
There's no distortion from those negative emotions we just talked about. It's like having all your senses aligned, giving you the same clear view without any of that emotional baggage messing things up.
Ah, I see. So a ruler who's governed by those enemies, their perception of reality is going to be skewed, and that's going to lead to bad decisions.
Exactly. Kautilya really understood the dangers of unchecked emotions. He knew that a clear mind was crucial for effective leadership.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm curious about something. No king can rule alone, right?
Right.
So how does Kautilya address the role of advisors and ministers?
Oh, he was very specific about that.
Hmm.
He placed a huge emphasis on having skilled and trustworthy counselors. And get this, he also had a whole system of spies. Yep, it's like something out of a spy novel. But first, let's talk about how he recommended choosing ministers. The process sounds incredibly tough.
Okay.
It wasn't just about asking for qualifications. They were actually put through these elaborate tests.
Assists like what?
Well, they were deliberately tempted with various things.
Tempted.
Yeah, like scenarios involving religious obligations, offers of money, even romantic entanglements and threats to their safety.
So it was like putting their integrity under a microscope.
Exactly. It was designed to see if they would compromise their morals under pressure. And the key to passing the test.
Let me guess. Refusing to give in.
You got it. Kautilya wanted ministers whose loyalty and ethics were beyond question.
That's pretty intense. Now, what about these spies?
Oh, the spy network was a whole other level of intrigue. He describes all sorts of disguises they would use.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Okay, get ready for this. Fraudulent disciple, recluse, householder, merchant, ascetic, classmate, even a firebrand, a poisoner, and a mendicant woman.
Wow, they really covered all the bases.
They were everywhere, blending into every level of society. He basically wanted eyes and ears everywhere to keep him informed.
It sounds like he was a bit paranoid.
Well, maybe, but you have to remember the context. Maintaining power in those times was incredibly challenging.
That's true.
And these spies weren't just randomly placed. He had specific roles for them. For example, he specifically mentions using spies disguised as ascetics to uncover financial crimes against the king.
Oh, interesting. So they were strategically placed to gather specific types of information.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about gathering intel in general. He also talks about using spies to keep tabs on potentially rebellious individuals.
People he saw as threats.
Right. Those with grievances against the king or people who were becoming too powerful or arrogant. He outlined tactics ranging from giving them unpleasant tasks, like collecting difficult fines, to outright punishment, or even holding their families as leverage.
Wow, that's pretty ruthless.
It was a different time, and maintaining control was paramount. He also stresses over and over the absolute necessity of secrecy in decision-making.
Okay.
He lists all the ways counsel could be betrayed, like carelessness, getting drunk, talking in your sleep, even love affairs.
It sounds like he really didn't trust anyone completely.
Well, he understood that leaks and gossip could be incredibly damaging, and when it came to getting an advice, he had a very specific recommendation.
That was that.
He advised consulting 3 or 4 ministers, no more, no less. He even argued against seeking endless opinions, saying it would just be, as he put it, infinite and endless.
So he valued focused input from a trusted few.
Exactly. Quality over quantity when it came to advice.
Makes sense. So we've got this elaborate system of advisors and spies, all working to help the king make the best decisions. But what about the king himself? What kind of responsibilities did Kautilya lay out for him?
Oh, he didn't hold back. He was incredibly specific, even outlining the king's daily routine. Yeah, it's broken down into 8 parts. It covered everything from personal security and managing finances to overseeing the military and strategic planning. Even the night was scheduled, with time for receiving secret envoys, personal care, study, and rest.
Wow, it sounds exhausting being a Kautilyan king.
No kidding. It really highlights the immense burden of leadership that he envisioned. But even more important than the schedule was the underlying principle.
Which was?
The king's primary duty was to ensure the happiness and well-being of his subjects. He famously said that the king should consider what pleases his people as good, not just what pleases himself.
That's a really striking statement. It almost sounds modern, with that emphasis on the well-being of the people.
It does, right. And he follows that up by emphasizing the importance of constant activity and diligently fulfilling one's duties, calling it the root of wealth. No slacking off for a Kautilyan king.
So he believed in leading by example, setting a high standard for everyone else.
Absolutely. He understood that a successful kingdom required constant effort and attention from its ruler. And speaking of attention to detail, he gets really specific about the king's personal safety and palace security.
Okay.
The palace itself was designed like a fortress within a city. It had separate areas for the king, the royal family, officials, all heavily guarded.
Layers of security.
And then the procedures for detecting poison in food and drink are really something else. They're incredibly detailed.
Like what?
Well, it involved observing the color and behavior of flames and smoke when food was being prepared.
Okay.
They would also test the food on birds, watching to see if they died after eating it.
Wow.
And they would even examine liquids and solids for any subtle changes in appearance that might indicate poison.
It sounds like a medieval forensics lab.
It really does. And then he describes the signs of someone who has administered poison: a dry mouth, excessive sweating, acting strangely.
So he was really paying attention to all the details, both in preventing poisoning and recognizing when it might have happened.
Exactly. It's all about vigilance and having those safeguards in place. He even stresses the need to always have physicians and poison experts on hand.
It makes you realize how dangerous life could be for a ruler back then, with threats potentially coming from anywhere.
Absolutely. But Cottilia's vision wasn't limited to the palace walls. He also delves into the practical matters of infrastructure and economic activities throughout the kingdom.
So he wasn't just focused on the king's personal power, he was thinking about the entire state.
Right. He talks about the importance of building forts at the borders, with guards stationed there, and internal watchers keeping an eye on things within the realm.
Like a multi-layered security system.
Exactly. And his land management policies are actually quite interesting. He advocated for encouraging cultivation, taking over unused land and either giving it to others or having the state farm it, and supporting diligent farmers.
So he was trying to maximize agricultural production and revenue.
Exactly. He even claimed royal ownership over activities like fishing, ferrying, and selling vegetables in state-controlled waters.
So the state had a significant hand in the economy.
It did. And this wasn't just about controlling resources. It was also about providing for the people. He stressed the state's responsibility to care for vulnerable populations: orphans, the elderly, the sick, and helpless women.
So it wasn't all about power and control. He had a social welfare aspect to his thinking as well.
He did. He saw the state as having a duty to care for those in need. And of course, we can't forget the strategic importance of elephants in warfare.
Of course.
He emphasized the need for skilled elephant handlers and described different types of fortifications like water forts, mountain forts, desert forts, and forest forts, each designed to take advantage of the terrain.
He was thinking about defense from all angles.
Absolutely. And the descriptions of how these forts were constructed are fascinating. He talks about the materials they used, like bricks, stone, palm trunks, the placement of towers and moats, and even the inclusion of guardian deities and religious sites within the forts.
So a blend of practical defense and symbolic power.
Exactly. He then gets into the roles of various officials. He starts with the chamberlain, who was responsible for the treasury, storehouses, the armory, and even the prison.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
It is. And then there's the collector general, who is in charge of gathering revenue from all sorts of sources: forts, rural areas, mines, forests, you name it. He even outlines different types of revenue: fixed taxes, unexpected income, and outstanding balances.
So a complex system of revenue collection.
And the system of rewards and punishments for these officials was pretty intense. If they exceeded expectations, they received a bonus.
Okay.
But if they fell short, they had to pay it back with interest. He was serious about accountability.
That's pretty motivating.
Yeah.
I bet they worked hard to meet their targets.
I'm sure they did. And he goes on to outline various forms of embezzlement, things like obstructing the collection of revenue, misusing treasury funds, manipulating records.
And I assume there were harsh penalties for those who were caught.
Oh, absolutely. He emphasized severe punishments and even encouraged the use of informants to uncover these activities.
So he was really trying to stamp out corruption wherever he could.
Exactly. He also highlights the importance of royal edicts, or letters, outlining their essential qualities like clarity and completeness, and different types of letters for different purposes.
So clear and effective communication was crucial.
Absolutely. He wanted to make sure there was no room for misinterpretation. And then he gets really detailed, describing all sorts of valuable items managed by the state.
Like what?
While he mentions pearl necklaces with specific names based on the number of strands, different kinds of corals, and their qualities, perfumes, animal hides, textiles from various regions, precious stones and metals like gold, silver, copper, lead, tin, you name it. He even goes into how to work with gold and silver, how to detect impurities and refine them.
It's like an inventory of the kingdom's treasures.
It really is. And he's not just listing them, he's describing how to identify quality, how to spot fakes. He even mentions fake stones and counterfeit metals being used in jewelry.
So he was teaching his officials how to be discerning and avoid being cheated.
Exactly. He wanted to make sure the state wasn't being taken advantage of. And this attention to detail continues. He then moves on to the accounting of agricultural production, the management of state granaries, and even specifies food rations for different animals.
Wait, rations for animals?
Yeah, it's pretty detailed. He covers everything from oxen and buffaloes to camels and even deer, each with their prescribed diets. It's amazing how much he thought about.
It really shows the breadth of his thinking.
Yeah.
He wasn't just focused on the big picture. He was paying attention to all the little details that made the system work.
And that extended to trade as well. He discusses how to assess the profitability of goods in foreign markets and how to engage with foreign officials.
So he wasn't just thinking about the domestic economy. He was thinking about international trade as well.
He was. It's a surprisingly global perspective for his time. He even goes on to list different types of timber and bamboo, various kinds of weapons and armor.
He wanted to make sure the state was well equipped, both economically and militarily.
Exactly. He was thinking about all aspects of national strength. And then he dives into the system of weights and measures and even the measurement of time.
Okay.
He outlines everything from the smallest unit of measurement, the angula, up to larger units, and even breaks down the divisions of months and years. It's a very standardized system.
So he was emphasizing precision and consistency in all areas of administration.
Absolutely. And then he describes the role of the superintendent of tolls, who was responsible for collecting taxes on trade, with strict penalties for anyone who tried to evade payment or misrepresent their goods.
It's making sure the state was getting its fair share of revenue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then he discusses agricultural practices, how to determine the best time for sowing crops, the use of sharecroppers, even including a prayer for a good harvest.
So he recognized the importance of agriculture and the role of divine favor.
He did. And then he gets into the payment and provisions for various workers: watchmen, slaves, laborers, and artisans.
So he was thinking about the welfare of those who kept the state running.
He was. He understood that a well-functioning state relied on all its people, and even the production and sale of alcohol was carefully regulated with license fees and tolls.
Wow, so the state had a hand in almost every aspect of life.
It did. And then there's the superintendent of prostitutes, who had a whole set of duties. He was responsible for things like setting the fees prostitutes could charge for their freedom, making sure they performed certain mandatory services, and even finding alternative employment for those who could no longer work as prostitutes.
It's a bit of a controversial topic from our modern perspective, but it shows how he attempted to regulate and control even the most sensitive areas of society.
It does. And then we have the superintendent of ships, who was responsible for managing navigation on all the waterways and collecting taxes on activities like fishing and using ports.
So waterways were an important part of the economy.
They were. And then there's the superintendent of cows, responsible for managing the various herds of cattle, and the superintendent of horses, who oversaw the breeding, care, and training of horses.
It seems like every aspect of animal husbandry was carefully managed.
It was. And these descriptions are really detailed. He even describes the different gaits and movements of horses and how elephants were trained for both warfare and riding.
So he had a deep understanding of these animals and their uses.
He did. And then there's the superintendent of passports, responsible for controlling the movement of people in and out of the kingdom, and the superintendent of roads, who was in charge of maintaining the infrastructure.
It's all very interconnected. Every official had a role to play in keeping the state running smoothly.
It's a very systematic approach to governance. And of course, we can't forget the extensive use of spies, which we discussed earlier. He provides detailed descriptions of how they were used to monitor various individuals and locations throughout the kingdom.
A true intelligence network.
And it wasn't just about high-level spying. Even local officials, like the Gopa, who was in charge of 5 or 10 villages, and the Stanika, responsible for a district within the capital, had duties related to gathering information and keeping records.
So he had a very granular approach to intelligence gathering. Nothing was too small to escape his notice.
Exactly. He even outlines rules about lodging, reporting suspicious individuals, and fire safety in the city. He was all about maintaining order and security.
And then he gets into the legal system, right?
He does. He discusses the validity of agreements and the role of witnesses in disputes.
Okay.
Interestingly, he considered agreements made by spies in disguise to be valid, and agreements within associations were also binding, even if they were private. But agreements made by someone who was dependent on another person or by someone who wasn't authorized to make such agreements, those were considered void.
So he had a system of contract law that took into account different circumstances.
He did. And the rules regarding witnesses were also important. He outlines their fees and the consequences of giving false testimony, emphasizing the importance of truthful evidence in legal proceedings.
Makes sense. He wanted to ensure that justice was served.
He did. And then he gets into the four foundations of law. Dharma, which is righteous conduct, Vyavahara, which is evidence, Charitra, which is tradition, and Sasana, which is the royal decree.
So he saw law as having both moral and practical dimensions.
He did. And then he delves into specific laws. He covers marriage, including different types of marriage, dowry, and even women's property rights. He also discusses vagrancy, elopement, and inheritance laws with rules for how property should be divided among heirs.
It's a fascinating window into the social norms and legal practices of his time.
It really is. And then he gets into regulations for building houses, including requirements for drainage and fireplaces, and the penalties for violations.
So he was thinking about public health and safety as well.
He was. He also covers rules regarding boundaries and encroachments on different types of land, emphasizing the importance of clear property lines. He even lays out procedures for settling disputes based on a neighbor's testimony.
So he thought about all sorts of potential conflicts.
He did. He also discusses rules about dilapidated buildings and who was responsible for their repair, regulations for obstructing roads and damage caused by livestock, even down to the fines that should be levied.
It's amazing how detailed he gets.
It is. He seems to have anticipated almost every possible scenario. And then he moves on to laws about deposits and pledges, emphasizing the responsibilities of the person holding them and the penalties for misuse.
So he wanted to make sure that people's property was protected.
He did. He also regulated transactions between individuals, emphasizing the need for transparency and witnesses to prevent fraud. And then he discusses the legal status of slaves and laborers, including their rights, the possibility of earning their freedom, even their ability to own property.
So he had a complex understanding of social hierarchy and the rights and obligations of different groups within society.
He did. He even outlines regulations for priests performing religious ceremonies, with consequences if they didn't complete the rituals properly. And he covers laws regarding insults and physical assault, with the punishments varying depending on the severity of the offense and the social status of those involved.
So the law took into account the context of the crime.
It did. And while gambling was allowed, it was strictly controlled by the state, mainly to monitor for spies and thieves, and unauthorized gambling was still punished.
So he saw the potential dangers of gambling, but also its usefulness for intelligence gathering.
Exactly. He also established regulations for various trades and crafts like weavers, merchants, goldsmiths, focusing on ensuring quality, accurate weights and measures, and fair pricing. He was all about preventing deception and fraud in the marketplace.
So he wanted to create a fair and orderly economic system.
He did. And then he gets into the methods for identifying and capturing criminals. He outlines how to use spies and various pretexts to catch them, and he details the procedures for investigating theft, determining who owns recovered goods, and apprehending suspects.
So a whole system of law enforcement.
Exactly. And he even outlines the process for investigating sudden deaths, trying to determine the cause, and then he discusses different forms of torture that could be used in investigations.
Torture.
Yeah, it's a dark side of his thinking. He describes various physical methods, as well as things like sleep deprivation and exposure to the elements.
It's pretty disturbing from a modern perspective.
It is, but it's important to remember the historical context. These practices were unfortunately common in many parts of the world back then.
That's true.
And then he gets into specific punishments for various crimes. Theft, for example, was punished based on the value of the stolen goods, with penalties ranging from fines to physical punishments and even death for significant or repeat offenses.
So the punishment fit the crime.
It did. He outlined specific penalties for stealing different things, from wild animals to agricultural tools, even for unauthorized entry into forts and theft of vehicles. And then there are punishments for cheating at gambling, causing an abortion, and violent crimes like spreading false rumors, breaking into houses, and sexual offenses. The severity of the punishment often depended on the social status of those involved.
So social hierarchy played a role in the legal system.
It did. And then he addresses how to deal with seditious individuals and their associates, outlining strategies for eliminating them. He also discusses how to deal with public unrest, including methods for handling seditious individuals using spies, poison, and even fabricated accusations.
It sounds like he was really concerned about maintaining order and stability.
He was. He saw any threat to the state as a serious matter. And then he outlines the elements of sovereignty, which include the king, the minister, the country, the fort, the treasury, the army, and allies.
All the essential components of a powerful state.
Exactly. And then he discusses the desirable qualities of a king, emphasizing the importance of a ruler who is noble, virtuous, truthful, and self-controlled.
So character was just as important as power.
It was. He believed that a flawed king would ultimately be vulnerable, both to his own people and to his enemies. And then he gets into alliances, how to choose allies, how to manage relationships with powerful rulers, and then he delves into strategies of war and peace, including when to declare war, when to make peace, and the considerations for launching a military campaign.
So he's covering all aspects of statecraft, from internal governance to foreign relations.
He is. He discusses the things that can lead to decline, greed, and disloyalty within an army, and the importance of addressing these issues. He also talks about how to combine forces with allies and different types of peace treaties.
It's a sophisticated understanding of international relations for his time.
It really is. He then outlines different strategies for weakening enemies and gaining advantages through alliances and interventions. He also discusses when and how to help allies in need. And he even talks about agreements for gaining new allies or acquiring wealth, and peace treaties aimed at gaining territory, taking into account the nature of the adversary.
So he was always thinking strategically, weighing the potential costs and benefits of different actions.
He was. And he emphasizes the importance of a strong treasury and a powerful army for any ruler who wants to conquer new lands. He also outlines the behavior expected of a subordinate king towards his overlords, and he contrasts the qualities of wise and brave princes, discussing the methods for both forming and breaking peace agreements.
So he understood the nuances of power dynamics between rulers.
He did. And then he describes the role of a Madhyama king, who is like an intermediary ruler, and a neutral king, and how a conqueror should interact with them. And he introduces the concept of the mandala, which is like a geopolitical system of interconnected states.
So he was mapping out the political landscape of his time.
He was. And then he discusses the relative importance of different elements of the state, like the minister and the people, the chamberlain and the revenue collector, and he outlines different types of allies in distress and how to help them. He also compares the strategic value of forts and financial resources.
So he was constantly evaluating and reevaluating the strengths and weaknesses of different aspects of the state.
He was. And then he analyzes the types of crises that can affect the elements of sovereignty, things like a lack of finances, a weak army, internal unrest, and he discusses their implications for both offensive and defensive strategies.
He was thinking about all the potential challenges a ruler might face.
He was. And then, interestingly, he discusses the potential downsides of activities like gambling and hunting.
So he wasn't advocating for a life of pure pleasure and indulgence.
No, he believed in moderation and self-control, even for a king. And then he outlines the different types of threats a state might face, including natural disasters, internal obstacles, and financial problems. He compares the relative impact of calamities like fire and floods, the value of domestic versus foreign resources, and the strengths and weaknesses of different types of armies.
He was trying to assess the level of danger posed by various threats.
He was. And then he gets into strategies for dealing with treacherous individuals within the kingdom, including the prince, the minister, and the commander-in-chief. He also discusses how to sow dissension among the enemy's ranks and how to deal with foreign interference.
So he was thinking about threats both internal and external.
He was. He understood that danger could come from anywhere. And then he emphasizes the roles of the king, the ministers, and capable agents in achieving success. And he discusses different types of dangerous situations and how to overcome them.
So he believed in having a strong team and being prepared for anything.
Exactly. And then he outlines the order in which to apply different strategic tools: conciliation, bribery, sowing division, and finally, force.
So he had a hierarchy of options, starting with diplomacy and escalating to violence only as a last resort.
That's right. And then he describes the layout of a king's military encampment during wartime and how to boost the morale of one's own troops and what to do with a defeated enemy army. He even discusses which types of battlefields are most advantageous for different divisions of the army, and he describes various battle formations and how to counter them.
So he was a military strategist as well.
He was. He thought about every aspect of warfare. And then he moves on to strategies for gaining the support of guilds and corporations and how to deal with those who oppose you. He even introduces the idea of a battle of intrigue, focusing on methods for deceiving the enemy.
Sounds like he was a master of manipulation.
He certainly understood the power of deception. He even discusses how to assassinate the enemy's commander-in-chief and how to incite other states against them. And he talks about using spies and deception involving religious beliefs and superstitions to demoralize the enemy.
It sounds like he was willing to use any means necessary to achieve victory.
It does seem that way. And then he gets into methods for undermining enemy forts, infiltrating them, sabotaging them. He also discusses siege warfare tactics and how to govern conquered territories.
So he wasn't just focused on winning battles, he was thinking about what came after.
Exactly. He understood that true victory involved more than just military success. He then outlines the use of fire and incendiary devices against enemy fortifications, and he discusses various ways to poison water and food supplies, even mentioning substances that can cause specific effects like blindness or the inability to eat.
Wow, that's pretty ruthless.
It is. It shows the lengths he was willing to go to achieve his goals. And then he touches on secret practices, the use of charms, drugs, and rituals for various purposes.
So he was open to using unconventional methods as well.
He was. And then he concludes by explaining how to understand and interpret ancient texts, defining key terms like example, reason, application, and settled opinion.
So he was providing a framework for understanding his own work.
He was. It's a very comprehensive and thought-provoking treatise.
It really is. As we've seen, the range of topics he covers is remarkable. It's clear he had a deep understanding of governance, statecraft, economics, even human psychology.
His advice is often surprisingly practical, and sometimes, yes, undeniably ruthless.
It reflects the realities of his time.
It does. But even though it was written centuries ago, the Arthashastra still offers valuable insights into leadership, strategy, and human behavior that are relevant even today.
It makes you think about the enduring nature of power and the challenges of governing a complex society.
It really does. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. Considering these principles, what aspects of modern governance, or even your own personal interactions, do you see reflected in Kautilya's Arthashastra?
It's a question worth thinking about. And if you're intrigued by what we've discussed today, we encourage you to explore the full text of the Arthashastra. You'll find even more fascinating insights into this ancient masterpiece of political thought.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Kautilya. Until our next exploration, keep thinking deeply.